This is kind of a combo. Wendy's Coffee House and Conscious Living. It's what I do. It's what I've done. Channeling, intuition, intuitive, psychic. Labels are us, and they're all relative. So I'm going to get into some of the experiences and some of the ways that people approach ghosts, the unseen, and others that we have yet to identify. I call them transdimensionals in this next half hour. I'll just give it a one-stop shopping label, paranormal, and go from there. What to do about ghosts and what to do about basically things like psychic attack. In other words, having entities show up, which I do from time to time, and then saying I would rather this didn't happen. One of the classics is Dion Fortune, and I have her book, and I'll recommend it. It's available on Amazon. This was written in the 30s, and it's a powerful book, and you can take it whatever works for you with a grain of salt. Read it for enjoyment, read it for some support. But one way or the other, there are some things in there that do work and some suggestions that if you have an opening, an inkling to the psychic plane, that you might find helpful in terms of putting some barriers and boundaries around you. The first thing when you're meditating or anything like that is always ask it be for the highest good, and basically in some way, shape, or form, boost your energy, white light around you. That's a protective element. By putting that white light around you and asking that whatever you're doing be for the highest good, you give yourself a buffer from all the other stuff that's already in your space. I had somebody tell me that, if you wanted to open your eyes to the next dimension, the psychic plane, then be ready to see things that might frighten you. And not that they should, because they've been there all along. You just weren't able to see them. But that was some advice that said that, there's more going on here than we realize. And when we do open our eyes or become aware of this other stuff that's around us in many different forms, then it can be a little bit intimidating. And that's part of the awakening that happens. There were some questions recently in a forum on Facebook dealing with extraterrestrials. And somebody brought up something that, to me, was definitely somebody's third eye opening, becoming more intuitive and becoming more psychic. The person was being able to hear more thoughts from people around them. And working in retail, I've had that happen. I've also had people who've had very dominant energy shut down registers, and that kind of black and white energy that creates problems in your own space because you're very linear in the way of thinking. And so when something is an obstacle and you confront it psychically, mentally, without awareness, then things tend to jam up around you. That's been fascinating. It was a very, very informative and educational experience, learning as this was happening that it wasn't me. I wasn't the one who broke the register. And the fun part was when a manager who was very domineering and belligerent and intimidating sometimes, that manager was trying to train everybody on the registers. And the day that the training happened, because the manager was upset and for whatever reason, just anxious and impatient, what I don't know what was going on with the person, but she shut down the registers. And so we didn't have any register training because she broke them. Electronics. Now, I also have my night lights go on and off 24/7. And then, like last night, I'm reading, and the bedside lamp is just flickering on, off, on, off. That's my indication that there's a presence around all the time. And for me, it's comforting. For me, it's just a reminder that we aren't alone, that we have guidance, we have support, we have influence. Now, if your thoughts, depending on how you're thinking, if you're more focused on the negative stuff, that'll amp up some of the negative energy because they're drawn to us. Basically, you're an energy source. And so if you're in a place that has a lot of contrary energy, I hate to say good and bad because it's all relative. It's the way we project our thoughts. And sometimes bad things happen for a good reason, to get us out of the way, to protect us, to steer us a different direction. And it's meant to be a stop. It's meant to say, back off, do something different. And so, like, you have an accident, and your accident is involved in a 1-car crash, but down the road there's a 6-car pileup. And so you avoided that It's a bad thing to happen. You had an accident, but it's a good thing you missed the one that was further down the road. So this kind of stuff in our thinking of thinking we project a negative or a positive result on something sometimes gets in our way. So the other night when this entity sat on my bed, I saw it for a brief second. And the entity, I know it's kind of a human form, but because it's only brief, I don't have a clear visual. So I don't know anything other than it was a black shadow, and it blocked my view of the clock. So knowing that I saw it for that brief second, it's like, okay, there's something here, and I need to pay attention. And sometimes that's all it's about. But it's also that third eye element of I was between waking up and asleep, so just in that hypnagogic state where I'm not quite focusing. The minute I try to focus, and this has happened before when there was a UFO in the bedroom, hovering under the ceiling, multicolored green and red. I thought that was fascinating because I've heard and seen stories about that since that time. Anyway, what happens is when I try to focus, then I lose it. And that's another thing about this. You have to be a little bit in a different dimension, in an altered state, fuzzy, to be able to get some of this stuff. And so some people complain that somebody is not paying attention, or you're spaced out, or you're foggy, or you're being goofy. And no, sometimes you're on another plane and you're actually getting more information, a bigger picture of what's going on, instead of this what's right in front of you in the visual plane. When we're focused on this visual plane, we miss a lot of cues. And we miss a lot of information. I had a huge shift in 2009, and somebody else was writing about this, and I thought, okay, this is the time I need to talk about it. I'm not going to give you all the details; it's too intense and it's too complicated. But the overview is, in my experience, guides told me about things that were going to happen in advance, and then those things happened. The information is telepathic. And so it's a voice saying this is going to happen. And it isn't even a voice, it's a sentence. Sometimes it's a voice, but most of the time it'll be a sentence, language, words, something, a direction indicating. And one of the words, the phrases was take a circuitous route. Okay. And the other thing that happened was a literal thing. I'm in the living room, and there's a lot of paranormal stuff happening, incredibly active. It's because I was making a shift, a change, a very dramatic change in my life, going from one path, turning around, facing completely the opposite direction, which pretty much everything hits the wall, okay? So if you're going through those kinds of changes in your life, this is when the paranormal stuff amps up. You have guides, you have help, you have others around you who are actually trying to help assist when you're making these changes. That's why people say, God gave me a direction. I saw the light. And some people call it a spiritually transformative event. There's a Canadian who wrote a book about all of these STEs. And I think that was out in the late 90s. Anyway, some of these things you don't even know the name for, OBE, NDE, STE, all of this kind of stuff. It's like when they changed from UFO to UAP. Okay, let's put a different name on it. It's the same thing, and some of the elements are the same. And again, somebody was talking about having all these incredible psychic experiences, hearing voices, hearing what other people are thinking, and not knowing what to do. And so in the alien forum, that's an ET thing. Everything isn't an ET. Everything isn't a ghost. Those are the names we have because we don't know any better. Because there's so much out there that it's hard to put a name or a label on it. And then when you do put the label, you have to keep looking and learning and experiencing to find out maybe there's a different label. Maybe there's something else that applies here. And that's how it goes. That's how we learn. Going back to the book, available at Amazon, Psychic Self-Defense, okay? This is a classic. And yes, it's a little dated because it was written in the 30s. And so Dion Fortune was an occultist. But some of this information, there are people who, with their thoughts, without even intending to, create obstructions and really can give you a hard time. And it isn't intentional. But then when it is intentional, it's good to have something in your back pocket to be able to say, I don't need this. This isn't mine. I don't need to experience this. And shut it down or block it. And having somebody ask me, because they're having a lot of paranormal experiences, and then realizing that because this person has invited, has engaged, is encouraging this type of activity, it's going to be difficult to shut it down. In researching the paranormal, or in visiting houses that are haunted, spaces that are known to have other entities and to have all sorts of paranormal activity, you open a door and you go in, and sometimes it can travel with you. And when it does travel with you, it's your response that determines what happens next. And that's why some of these books about psychic self-defense are helpful, because being forewarned, you have the ability to say no. And also techniques that help you say no. My problem is giving advice to somebody who has encouraged the activity because they wanted to prove it. This is where it gets complicated. When you want to prove something to someone else and show them, this is how it works, this is what happens, you amplify it for the most part. You're giving it permission to become in a fuller state of being, and you are actually charging it. Your energy, everything's energy. So when something like this happens, fear is actually a great bait. Why? Because when we are afraid, we are absolutely amplified. It's, red, 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 red. That's why people go to horror films and see those kinds of movies. I'm scared, I'm frightened, I want that adrenaline rush. Well, guess what? These entities are also really thrilled when we go for the adrenaline rush. And so you can sometimes take on more than you ask for. And so with somebody who is into this and really exploring and looking. Now, I'm not trying to put this 100% out there. These are experiences I've had with people I know. And so I'm speaking to that. And one person had to stop because that energy was affecting his personal life and family life. And it's like, you go into these places, you're not the only one there. And if you have a family and you take this stuff home, then they have to deal with the fallout. And there's no predicting it. It doesn't act the same way with everyone. And that's the whole point of this, is that sometimes these kinds of things don't have labels. And if you can find something that correlates, or somebody else who's had a similar experience, it's extremely helpful. One of the things about the Psychic Defense, the classic instruction manual for protecting yourself from paranormal attack, available on Amazon by Dion Fortune, is reading the comments, the people who've posted their experiences and their comments. A lot of times when I go on a YouTube channel and look at a certain, whatever the presentation is, whether it's ETs, whether it's ghosts, whether it's Bigfoot, Sasquatch, all that stuff, I look to see what the comments say, how people respond. And there are some fantastic bits of information. We all have a story. We all have things that excite us, and then things that we might be curious about that we have no explanation for that have happened, and we don't always know where to go. So a lot of times people will post in those comments their own experiences and say, this is what happened to me, looking for somebody to affirm it, looking for somebody to say, yes, I get that. And that in that experiencer, ET experiencer group, when they were all saying, the person said, I'm hearing other people's thoughts. All of a sudden, I know things in advance. Classic information that relates to a third eye opening, an expansion of awareness. Sometimes it's a trigger you won't even know. You won't even recognize that this is how it started. Other times it can be a crisis. For me, the crisis was a spiritually transformative event. Living in a house that had residual energy, and the time for me, I'm going through some tremendous changes, and this was in 1997, job upheaval, all that stuff. And I wrote about that in the book, Talking to Nightlights, too. That's available, Kindle, Amazon. And that was the very beginning of when this all kind of switched into higher gear and on a different plane. I was, at that point, started being more conscious of ghosts, being more conscious of entities, having visions, guided to go someplace, and listening and following through, basically to prove it for myself. Back to proof. Okay. In terms of doing the math, the answer is string theory, quantum theory, all of our higher math. We're still going to have to go higher to get to this, because what we're experiencing doesn't translate well to math. And most people who do this kind of stuff aren't really concerned about the math because it's happening. And when you're trying to prove it to somebody else who is a linear thinker, then most often they're going to say you're full of, anyway. And because they don't experience it. And not only that, when you tell them how to have the experience, there's a block. Because the first thing is it doesn't exist. In their own mental state, their mental capacity to fathom something unreal, they can't get past the block of it does not exist. When something happens, a crisis, something, it can be a health crisis, it can be a car accident, a death of somebody close by, then there is a possibility that they can break that. And I'm trying to think of the guy who was a famous skeptic when he and his wife, Shermer, had an experience. I believe it was her grandfather who died, and a watch that hadn't been used for years. That watch began ticking, and it changed his perspective about what could and could not happen. I don't have the details on the story in front of me at the moment, but that's the thing, a skeptic. And the other thing about someone who's a skeptic, when you use that label, a skeptic says, I don't believe. Okay? Accept the fact they don't believe. Get over it. You don't need to prove it. That's not your job. That's their role. So honor the role and say, okay, this isn't for you. This isn't for you. Someone who is objective and says, I need to know more, or I'm curious, has an opportunity to learn and to imprint this information and possibly go forward and take it to the next level. We all have that ability. Each and every one of us, we are a universe of potential. That's what we are. And so how many billions of people are here? Each and every one has this untapped potential in terms of how you're using your mind. What you're projecting can come back to you. If you have a mantra, and I'm not going to say a negative mantra because I really don't want to encourage it, but a mantra, I'm going to be a millionaire. I like that one, okay? I can do that. I'm going to be a millionaire. Why stop there? I'll be a billionaire. But I put that out there. It doesn't mean I have to get lockstep solid on that. However, if Helene Hansel is any proof, that doesn't hurt. That part of our ability is a mind engaged with reality and with fiction. The imagination in full bloom. That's our superpower. So when we are able to imagine a better outcome, we're upgrading. And not focusing, not worrying. Worrying is stewing. It's stewing your own juice. And so you're doing absolutely nothing except basically devolving. You just, it's energy not used to its best advantage. So worrying doesn't change anything. It keeps you stuck. So to avoid worrying, the minute I start to worry about something, I change. As soon as I become aware of it, I change. Okay, everything will work out for the highest good. This is working to my best advantage. There is a reason this needs to happen, and I'll benefit. I'll benefit from this. It's changing your thoughts to be proactive instead of reactive. So a lot of this, and I'm talking about this now because I have seen so many people who are challenged by current events. And boy, I tell you what, looking at the TV news over and over and over, that there's no way to escape the negativity, the onslaught of negative. And then if you tune into TV programs and put yourself in that same space of negativity, you're amplifying it. You're giving it more juice. Going back to the person who wants to get rid of these entities and this negative stuff, the paranormal elements, they're basically overwhelming. And in that way, sapping energy, draining energy to get out of it. The problem is the person is still curious and trying to prove it to others. This is how it works with proof. If it happens for you and it's repeatable, you see this happen on a regular basis. You've proved it to you. When you try to prove something to someone else, and I've done this with my nightlights, I've taken them to public events, places, the Main Street Galleria, and it performed perfectly there. Blink, 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 on, off, on, off, on, off. I took it to another event. It was for a local presentation in where I live. And on the stage, as I'm doing my talk, blink, blink, on, off. And it's just so subtle, so innocuous that people really don't think much of it. For me, when it happened, I'm like, oh, wow, my world changed because I knew there was more going on. All right. So for me, this interactive nightlight thing that's been going on for, 25 years, this is my wow. Okay. So, and that's all that matters. That's all that matters. But the initial thing is trying to show it to somebody else and see, do they get it? Do they know? Well, they might see it, but they may not get it. And so that's the thing when you've seen a ghost, you've seen a UFO. You've had an experience and it's a one-on-one, face-to-face with an ET. The challenge is trying to prove it because it was your experience. The cool thing about that, no one can take your experience away. It changed you. It shifted you. It tweaked you. Some way, shape, or form, the hard drive got messed with. Okay, and that then affects the software. So with all of this, our minds are the focus because how you integrate that information, that shift, that change, that upgrade determines what comes next. So you can continue to elevate, continue to amplify, continue to become self-aware of all of the programs that are in you that have yet to be identified and then brought to the surface to be activated. All right? So with all of this, going into the basic, putting a circle of protection around you as you do this work, amplifying your energy. The bottom line for doing that is love. It's compassion. It's acceptance. Why? Because that's the zone. It calms everything down. So when something around you is amping up, ramping up, causing dis-ease, discomfort, then you just zone out. And remember, love comes first. Everything gets quiet. Because there's no block, there's no there's no adversarial energy. When the adversarial energy comes in, that's where the conflict happens. And that's the juice for all the little boogie people, bogey people, obstructive people, not necessarily in physical form, to show up and to create some kind of distress. So going back to when the paranormal stuff starts to become more real, when your intuition is engaged and you have a sense of something happening, you can't identify it. How do you know it's real? Sometimes you will see a physical result. For me, the coffee pot turns off, or the lights blink, or something falls off the shelf. And even recently, it was a warning, and it was basically an affirmation. I was dealing with vertigo, still dealing with vertigo, which was a really okay, if I wasn't dizzy before. That's a whole different way to go. But with that, the car, there had been some other paranormal things happening too, but the car automatically put itself into park. Now, it moved for maybe 15 feet, and then it went into park. There's nothing wrong with the vehicle. And in order to put it into park, you have to pull and lift the lever to do that. So it wasn't something I could accidentally have done. But the reminder was I wasn't supposed to drive. Because with this, there can be a fast head movement, and all of a sudden the world's topsy-turvy. So little things. It was a protection. It was a sign of the protection around. Now, it doesn't matter if you believe this, okay? For me, this is my reality. So I'm sharing my reality to give you a clue that sometimes these things happen, that we may be able to explain it away. But the thing is, when more of these things happen, and it's a pattern, then it's our own knowing these things work. When I went to the park before I had the interview with Stanley Krippner, and this was about Rolling Thunder, Medicine Man, the fun thing about this, the day before we went, the day of, it was that morning, I was interviewing Stanley in the afternoon. The people in front of us, the guy with 2 kids, said, "Wait, watch out, there's a snake." And oh my gosh, the most incredible, beautiful, gorgeous rattlesnake I've seen. I think he was like a 3.5 foot, just beautiful. Going across the path. Okay, we have 2 dogs. I immediately pick up the small dog, and my husband holds the larger dog to make sure we're not going to be bothering the snake. And the little boy, the smallest of the 2 boys ahead of us, one's on bicycle, and they're both probably under 7. Anyway, he's curious, and the dad has to get him to scoot, hurry, And the snake, when he reaches the other side of the path and turns up on the hill, turns his head to look at us, there was this incredible eye-to-eye contact with this snake. And I thought, what a beautiful, beautiful being. The kicker is, Rolling Thunder used snake medicine. He was in the movie Billy Jack. And one of the things that he did to make sure that he would be immune to the snake if he was bitten was to be bitten by snakes. And that was a key. That was a signature. So here I am. I've never seen before or after a snake in that close proximity. Not only that, lift its head, turn around, and look at me. And it was an acknowledgement. And I said, thank you. Thank you. This was a gift to be able to have that encounter. And knowing that that was a way of connecting me, Stanley Krippner, Rolling Thunder, all of us in that moment. And I told Stanley later, as the interview. But it was such a powerful moment to have that connection. These are the kind of little things that sometimes can be overlooked when you're not aware, when you haven't done the homework, when you haven't had the environment, the background. A lot of this stuff came with guidance from those that I cannot see, spirit guides, because they came into the picture very quickly with this nightlight activation, the interactive experience I have with the energy of the nightlight. And then at the same time, there were other experiences that seemed like they were, the name was given was transdimensional. Like the time I walk through my living room or alongside the living room down the hall and see my cat perched on the back of a chair looking at me and thinking, I've got to take her a picture. She's calico, she's gorgeous, she's got this the moment she's posed and I can see her green collar with the pink heart on it, and she's just beautiful. I need a picture. I'm in the hallway past that room and thinking, she doesn't wear a collar. She's never worn a collar. My mind at that moment had automatically seen her and made everything okay. That she was sitting in the way that she did, which when I turn around within a couple seconds, 2 steps, to go back and look at her and stare at that. It was about 4 feet tall for her to have been in that place. And the image I know, for me, is a screen memory because she's looking at me with this Cheshire cat look. And when I go back, she's in the chair, curled up in the seat of the chair. For her to have been on the top at that level of the chair, there's no way, it's too thin for her little kitty butt to sit up there. And that was one of these, what the heck had I seen? And what was I not supposed to see? How did that work? Was my mind just completely unable to fathom what was in there at that moment? Or did it, as a way of protecting me, give me a screen memory, a screen image, so that I wouldn't be frightened out of my gourd? And that's the thing. The one thing I was given from the guides, beginning of all of this, was get a hold of your fear. Deal with your fear. Know your fear. Understand your fear. I'm exaggerating. They said, you have to work on your fear. Like, look, I've been attacked. I've been through that. I've recovered. I've had trauma. I've had stress. I know, I've been that. And I think I'm okay with fear. Okay, so at 3 o'clock in the morning when I hear this voice coming from the corner, maybe 8 feet from the bed, corner of the room, it says my name. And it says it in kind of a mechanical type voice. Wendy. It cannot pronounce the name. So I don't know if it was mechanical, but that's the way I explain it. Wendy. And from toe to head, all of a sudden I feel myself freeze up. And I thought, oh, darn it. Because that's what it gave me, was the very real personal touch of what happens when we go into that fear state. Frozen. And what that does is it blocks this other element. That's fight or flight. It's programmed. We have that. That's what the transdimensionals and all the ETs and all the others who are trying to get us to upgrade our software are saying, this is what you have to deal with. Your automatic fight or flight, automatic shoot first, ask questions later. What a way to go. All right? Dissect first. Figure out what happened. Those kind of things are counterproductive. So until we learn to actually ask questions and do more exploring, investigating, homework, we're stuck. We're regressing instead of progressing. This is going to be enough for now. I just wanted to get this out because I've had so many questions recently about what happens with this overwhelm of knowing things are going to happen and having others in my presence that would be considered a paranormal encounter. First, put your light on. Everything's okay. Everything is the way it needs to be at this time for us to move forward. I am learning. I am growing. I have protection. Thank you. All right? I appreciate your time. Thank you for listening. This is just a way to see the unseen. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it isn't present. You're welcome to follow my blog, Talking to Nightlights. It's on WordPress. And then I also have the book, Talking to Nightlights 2. It's a paperback or Kindle book. I'm going to be talking with Gary Wimmer, depending on when you listen to this show. It's coming up, or check it out in the archives. That covers all the bases. Again, thanks for listening. Think positive thoughts. You'll never know who's listening, but it might be nice to plan ahead. They will be listening. See ya.